She was told not to go. Not once. Not by one person. By everyone. Her mother said it would ruin her. Her father's solicitor said it was legally inadvisable. Her closest friend said it was the kind of thing that a woman does not come back from, not physically, not socially, not in any way that the world they lived in was prepared to accommodate or forgive. Even the carriage driver she hired, a man whose professional obligation was to take people where they needed to go without commentary, looked at the destination she gave him and then looked at her and said, with the specific careful tone of someone who has decided that silence would be a dereliction of conscience, "Are you certain, miss?" She said yes. She was certain. She had been certain for 6 weeks. Since the morning the imperial decree had appeared in the official gazette and she had read it at breakfast with her hands flat on the table and her tea going cold beside her and understood, with the clear precise attention she brought to everything that mattered, exactly what it meant and exactly what she was going to do about it. The empire had exiled him. Stripped the title. Seized the estates. Issued the decree of banishment with the cold administrative language of an institution that has decided a man is a problem and has found the most efficient solution to that problem, simply removing him from the territory where he might cause further inconvenience. He was across the border now. In the northern territories beyond the empire's formal reach. Alone, as far as anyone knew. Without the title that had defined him. Without the land that had been his family's for 200 years. Without anything, apparently, except whatever a man carries inside himself when everything external has been taken. The empire had buried him. Every person who had known his name had let the burial happen. Some had helped with the shoveling. Most had simply looked away with the comfortable efficiency of people who understand that association with a ruined man is its own kind of ruin and have made their calculations accordingly. She had not looked away. She had read the decree. She had sat with it for 6 weeks. She had examined everything she knew and everything she could find out and she had arrived, at the end of those 6 weeks, at the same place she had known she would arrive from the very first morning. And then she hired a carriage. And she told the driver where to go. And when he asked if she was certain she said yes. Because she was. If you are finding Duke's secret for the first time, every story on this channel is built to reach something real in you. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss one. This one is going to stay with you. Now let's go back to where it really begins. Her name was Adeline Ashworth. 24 years old. Second daughter of Lord Marchmont Ashworth, a man of considerable title, moderate warmth, and the specific kind of political instinct that had kept the Ashworth name intact through 3 successive imperial administrations by the simple method of never being visibly on the wrong side of anything. Adeline had grown up watching her father manage his position with the careful precision of a man who understood that survival in their world required a particular kind of blindness, a selective, cultivated, deliberately maintained inability to see the things that seeing would cost you. She had never been able to do it. Not because she was reckless. Because she was honest. And honesty, she had discovered across 24 years of living inside a world that rewarded its opposite, was the most inconvenient quality a person could be born with. She had one person in her life who understood this about her and did not try to change it. His name was Callum Reyes. Duke of Velmore. 28 years old when she first met him at the Imperial Spring Assembly 3 years ago, an event she had attended with the resigned composure of a woman who understood her social obligations and was prepared to fulfill them without particular enthusiasm. She had been in the East Gallery of the Assembly Hall, away from the main reception, standing at a window that looked onto the formal gardens below, watching the performance of the evening from a distance that felt more honest than participation. Someone came and stood at the window beside her. She did not look away from the gardens. He said, "You are doing the same thing I am doing." She said, "And what is that?" He said, "Watching from somewhere that feels like the real version of the room rather than the performed version." She turned. He was looking at the gardens, not at her. Dark coat. The kind of profile that belonged to someone who was used to being looked at and had decided indifference was the most efficient response. But there was something in the way he was standing, the slight forward lean of someone who was actually watching something rather than simply positioning themselves near a window for social effect. She said, "The real version of this room is that 200 people are performing versions of themselves that have been specifically calibrated for this audience and nobody is saying anything true." He said, "Yes. That is exactly what I mean." She said, "It is not a comfortable observation." He said, "Comfortable observations are not particularly useful." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned back to the gardens. She said, "Adeline Ashworth." He said, "I know. Callum Reyes. I know you know." She said, "I know." They stood at the window for another 20 minutes while the reception performed itself behind them and talked about the gardens and then about the political architecture of the evening and then about the gap between what imperial policy said about the Northern Territories and what was actually true of the people living in them and then about a book they had both read and disagreed about in ways that required raising voices slightly and then about why raising voices slightly felt more honest. Then the entire preceding 3 hours of the reception. When she left that evening, Margot, her closest friend, sharp-tongued and loyal, who had appeared at her elbow as she collected her coat, said simply, "Who was that?" Adeline said, "Callum Reyes, Duke of Velmore." Margot said, "I know who he is. I am asking who he was tonight." Adeline was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The only person in that room who was standing somewhere real." What followed was not fast. It was built with the specific care of two people who are both, for different reasons, accustomed to being cautious about the things that matter. He called on her. They talked. They disagreed. They found, in the disagreement, the specific pleasure of two people who are not performing agreement for social comfort but are actually engaging with each other's thinking and finding it worth engaging with. He told her about Velmore, not the title, not the political weight of it, but the actual place. The way the northern light fell across the landscape in the early morning. The specific character of the people who had worked that land for generations. The responsibility of it, which he described not as burden but as the thing that made getting up in the morning mean something. She told him about growing up watching her father manage his position, the selective blindness, the cultivated inability to see the costly things. She told him she had never been able to do it and had spent 24 years trying to understand whether that was a flaw or not. He said, "It is not a flaw." She said, "It is frequently inconvenient." He said, "Inconvenience and flaw are not the same thing." She understood, somewhere in that conversation, that she was looking at someone who saw the world the same way she did. Not identically, their disagreements were real and frequent and occasionally loud. But from the same fundamental commitment to what was actually true rather than what was convenient to believe. That was rarer than it should have been. She loved him before she had a name for it. The name arrived 3 months after the assembly, on a Tuesday morning when she woke up and understood with the quiet certainty of something that had been true for a while and was simply now acknowledged, that whatever happened next, she was not the same person she had been before the East Gallery window. She did not tell him immediately. She held it for 2 weeks, examining it with the same honesty she applied to everything, looking for the gap between what was real and what she wanted to be real. It held up. She told him on a Thursday with rain against the window. He said he had known for 6 weeks and had been waiting not because he doubted it but because he understood that she would need to be certain in her own way and on her own timeline and that rushing that process would have been a fundamental misunderstanding of who she was. She said, "You waited 6 weeks without saying anything." He said, "Yes." She said, "That is either remarkably patient or remarkably arrogant." He said, "I prefer to think of it as accurate." She laughed. It was unguarded. Genuine. The kind that arrives before the composure catches it. He looked at her when she laughed with the expression of someone storing something carefully. The trouble had been building for longer than most people knew. Adeline had seen it. She had watched the political architecture shift around Callum across the preceding year with the clear attentive accuracy of someone who understood how these things worked and could read the signs that most people either missed or preferred not to see. He had made enemies. Not through recklessness. Through honesty. Through the specific inconvenient habit of saying true things in rooms where true things were unwelcome, raising questions in Imperial Council about the treatment of the Northern Territories, about the gap between official policy and actual practice, about the specific and documented ways in which the Empire's administration of the border regions was producing outcomes that no honest accounting could defend. The men who ran those systems had not liked this. They were patient men. Powerful men. The kind who understood that the most effective response to inconvenient truth was not to argue with it but to dismantle the person saying it, quietly, carefully, using the machinery of imperial administration with the same efficiency that machinery had always been used for. It took them 18 months. The official charge was financial impropriety, a complex allegation involving Velmore estate accounts and a series of transactions that had been, the documents claimed, deliberately structured to circumvent imperial revenue obligations. The documents were detailed. They were specific. They were, Adeline understood immediately upon reading them, constructed with the specific care of people who had spent considerable time making something false look thorough. She had said this out loud. In 2 separate conversations with 2 separate people who had the ability to do something about it. Neither of them had. Her father had looked at her across his study with the expression she knew, the selective blindness activating in real time, and said that the documents were what they were and that the Imperial Council had reviewed them and that there was very little to be gained from positioning the Ashworth name on the wrong side of an imperial proceeding. She had looked at her father for a long moment. She had said, "The wrong side is the side that is not true." He had said, "Adeline." Just that. Just her name. With the specific exhaustion of a man who had loved his daughter for 24 years and had never once managed to give her the practical gift of his particular blindness. The decree came on a Tuesday morning in the official gazette. Exile. Immediate. The Northern Territories beyond the Empire's formal jurisdiction. The title of Duke of Velmore dissolved. The estate seized and placed under imperial administration. The name Callum Reyes to be treated, for all official purposes, as no longer relevant to the Empire's ongoing affairs. Adeline read it at breakfast. She read it twice. Then she placed it on the table and sat with her hands flat on the surface and her tea going cold and understood, with the clear precise attention she brought to everything that mattered, that the Empire had just done the thing she had watched it building toward for 18 months. And that she was going to cross the border. She did not decide this in that moment. She recognized it. The way you recognize something that has been true for a while and is simply now named. She spent 6 weeks being methodical about it. She found out where he was, not easily, not through official channels, but through the specific network of people who know things that official channels prefer not to know. A village in the Northern Territories 2 days' ride beyond the border crossing at Vale. A modest arrangement. A man living quietly in a place the Empire had decided to pretend did not exist. She organized her affairs. She wrote letters, to Margot, to her father, clear and honest letters that said exactly what she was doing and why and that did not ask permission because she understood that permission was not going to be given and asking for it would only add the weight of someone else's fear to what she was already carrying. She hired the carriage on a Monday morning. She told the driver the destination. He asked if she was certain. She said yes. She was certain. "Stop here. Because I need you to understand what Adeline is doing and what it is costing her. She is not being reckless. She is not being impulsive. She has spent 6 weeks being more rigorous about this decision than most people are about any decision in their lives. She is choosing the true thing over the convenient thing. The way she has always done. The way that has always been inconvenient. The way that has never once stopped being right. Have you ever done that? Chosen the true thing when everything around you, every person, every voice, every practical consideration, was pointing toward the convenient one. Tell me in the comments on Duke's secret. Because what she finds when she crosses that border, and what Callum Reyes does when he sees her coming, that is where this story becomes something else entirely. The border crossing at Vale took 4 hours. The Imperial checkpoint was staffed by 2 officers who looked at her travel documents and then at her and then at the destination she had listed and then at each other with the specific communicative efficiency of 2 people who have worked together long enough to have entire conversations in a glance. The senior officer said, "The Northern Territories are outside Imperial jurisdiction, miss. We cannot guarantee your safety or your return." She said, "I understand." He said, "The road beyond the crossing is not maintained." She said, "I understand that too." He looked at her for a moment. Then he stamped the documents and stood aside. The road beyond the crossing was not maintained. The carriage moved slowly across ground that had not been tended by Imperial infrastructure and had developed, in its neglect, a kind of rough honesty that the maintained roads on the Empire's side did not have. The landscape was different here, wider, colder, with the particular quality of places that have not been organized for anyone's convenience and are therefore more fully themselves. She watched it through the carriage window and thought about Callum describing the northern light in the early morning. The way it fell across the landscape. The specific character of it. She understood, looking at this landscape, what he had meant. It took 2 days. The village was small, a gathering of stone buildings around a central square, with the specific self-sufficiency of a place that had been managing without external support for a long time and had no particular expectation that this would change. The people she passed looked at the carriage with the measured curiosity of communities that see few visitors and have learned to assess them quickly. She asked at the first house she came to where she might find a man named Callum Reyes. The woman who answered looked at her for a long moment. Then she pointed to the far end of the village where a single building sat slightly apart from the others, a small garden at its front, smoke from the chimney. Adeline walked. She did not rehearse what she was going to say. She had learned that rehearsing was the wrong approach, that the prepared version of what you meant to say was always slightly less true than the unprepared one, smoothed in ways that served your comfort rather than the person you were speaking to. She knocked. Footsteps inside. The door opened. He had not expected her. That was the first thing she saw, the complete absence of preparation in his face. No managed expression. No composed reception. Simply Callum Reyes standing in the doorway of a modest house 2 days beyond the Imperial border looking at her with the specific unguarded shock of someone who has stopped allowing themselves to expect things and has been caught by the unexpected before the defenses could assemble. He said, "Adeline." Just that. She said, "I told you I would always stand somewhere real. This is where real is right now." He stood very still. She said she had read the decree. She had read the documents behind it. She had spoken to 3 people with direct knowledge of the proceedings and had found, without exception, evidence of a construction, patient, detailed, carefully assembled by people with the specific motivation of removing an inconvenient voice from a room where it was causing problems. She said she had spent 6 weeks being certain before she came. Not because she doubted him. Because she had learned that certainty earned through rigor was worth more than certainty arrived at quickly and she had wanted to bring him the rigorous kind. She said she was not there to rescue him. She understood that he was a man who did not require rescuing and that arriving with that energy would have been a misunderstanding of who he was. She was there because the Empire had buried him in a place it assumed she would not follow. And the Empire had been wrong about her. He looked at her for a long moment with the expression she knew, the one that was not coldness and not severity but the face of someone who was examining something with full attention and finding it exactly what it presented itself to be. He said, "Your father." She said her father had looked at her with his particular selective blindness and she had told him that the wrong side was the side that was not true. He said, "The Ashworth name." She said the Ashworth name would survive. It had survived 3 imperial administrations. It would survive one daughter who crossed a border for the right reason. He said, "Adeline. What you have given up to be here. She said, I have given up the convenient version of my life. I gave that up the night I stood at an East Gallery window and talked to the only person in the room who was standing somewhere real. I simply did not know it yet. He stepped back from the door. She came inside. The house was modest in the way that places are modest when they have been stripped of everything decorative and what remains is only what is necessary. A table. Books, of course books, she had expected books, he had always had books the way other men had weapons, with the same seriousness and the same purpose. A fire. A window that faced north and in the early morning, she would discover, caught the light in exactly the way he had described. She had brought 2 trunks. She did not apologize for them. She told him that night, by the fire, with the northern dark pressing against the window, everything she had found across 6 weeks of investigation. Every source. Every document she had been able to access. Every gap between the official narrative and what the evidence actually supported. He listened without interrupting. When she finished he was quiet for a long time. Then he said he had known the risk. Had known, from the first question he raised in Imperial Council, that he was making himself a target. Had continued anyway because the alternative, the selective blindness, the cultivated inability to see the costly things, was a thing he had watched up close in men he had respected and had understood it was not something he was capable of. She said she knew. He said, you are your father's daughter in every way except the one that would have made this easier. She said, I am aware. I have been aware of that for 24 years. He looked at her across the fire. He said, I need you to understand what I can offer you from here. It is not what I could have offered you before. The title is gone. The estates are gone. What exists is this house, this village, this landscape, whatever I am able to build from what remains. It is a real life. I believe it is a real life worth living. But it is not the life you were raised for and I will not pretend otherwise. She said, I was raised for the convenient life. I have never been able to live it. I spent 24 years in it feeling like I was standing in the performed version of a room rather than the real one. I crossed 2 days of unmaintained road to get to the real one. I am not going back to the performance. He said, Adeline. She said, I know what I am choosing. I chose it 6 weeks ago. I have been rigorous about it. I am not going to revisit the decision every time you remind me of what it costs because the cost is not the thing that matters. The true thing is the thing that matters. It has always been the only thing that matters to me. That is not going to change because we are on the wrong side of an imperial border. He was quiet. Then he said, you are the most honest person I have ever known. She said, I know. It has been enormously inconvenient. He laughed. She had not heard him laugh since before the decree. It was the same laugh she had catalogued at the assembly 3 years ago, unguarded, genuine, arriving before the filter caught it. She stored it carefully. The Empire did not reverse the decree. That is not how these things work and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. The men who had built the case against Callum were still in their positions and still in their warm offices and the machinery they had used was still running. But something else happened. Adeline's letters, the ones she had written before crossing the border, the ones she had sent to Margot and to 2 others she trusted, the ones that said exactly what she was doing and why and laid out with the specific organized clarity of a woman who had spent 6 weeks being rigorous everything she had found about the construction of the case against Callum, those letters arrived. Were read. Were passed, carefully, to people who had the specific combination of motivation and ability to do something with them. It took time. It always takes time. Accountability at that level moves through institutional resistance the way water moves through stone, slowly, with enormous pressure, and with results that are not visible until they suddenly are. But it moved. What mattered more, in the immediate way that immediate things matter, was the life that assembled itself in the Northern Territories across the following months. The village had a practical relationship with honesty that Adeline found deeply restoring. People here said what they meant. They helped when help was needed and asked for it when they needed it and did not perform either. The work was real, the kind of work that produces visible results, that is connected to actual outcomes, that does not require the management of appearances as a primary occupation. She built things. A small school, because there were children and no formal education within 2 days' ride. A system for organizing the village's communication with the border trading posts, because she was a woman who organized things and because the existing system was inefficient in ways that were costing people real money. Callum worked the land. Learned it the way he had told her he knew Velmore, through presence, through patience, through the accumulated knowledge of someone who understood that a place reveals itself to the people who stay long enough to pay attention. They disagreed regularly. About the school's curriculum. About the trading post system. About a decision regarding the northern road that they debated across 3 evenings with the specific productive intensity of 2 people who are genuinely engaging rather than performing agreement. She won 2 of the 3 debates. He won the 3rd and was gracious about it in a way that she found more irritating than if he had been ungracious. She told him so. He laughed. That laugh again. Stored again. One morning, 6 months after she had crossed the border, in the early light that came through the north window in exactly the way he had described, she sat at the table with her tea and looked at the room around her. The books. The fire. The garden at the front of the house where she had planted things in the autumn and was waiting to see what would come up. The sound of him in the next room moving with the unhurried purpose of someone who has found the shape of his day and inhabits it fully. She thought about the East Gallery window. About 2 people standing somewhere real while a performance happened behind them. About the word inconvenient and the word flaw and the space between them that she had never been able to collapse no matter how practical the argument for doing so. About her father's face in his study, the selective blindness activating, the careful managed survival instinct doing what it had always done. About the carriage driver who had asked if she was certain. About the imperial checkpoint officer who had stamped her documents and stood aside. About 2 days of unmaintained road and the northern light and a door opening and a man's face with all its defenses down. She thought about what the Empire had decided about Callum Reyes. Buried. Removed. Made irrelevant by decree. She thought about what she had decided. That the decree was wrong. That the burial had been performed by people who had confused the convenient story with the true one. That the true one was this room, this morning, this life assembled from what remained after everything decorative had been stripped away. That she had crossed a border to find it. That she would cross it again. She picked up her tea. She looked out the north window at the light coming across the landscape in exactly the way he had said. She thought, yes. This is somewhere real. Before you go. Because I need you to hear the real thing this story was saying. Adeline Ashworth was told not to go by everyone she knew. Her mother. Her father. Her closest friend. A carriage driver who felt obligated by conscience to ask the question. She went anyway. Not because she was reckless. Not because she was impulsive. Not because she had failed to understand what crossing that border would cost her. Because she had spent 6 weeks being more rigorous about the decision than most people are about anything. Because she had examined every source, every document, every conversation, every gap between what was claimed and what was true. Because she had earned her certainty before she acted on it. And because she had understood, somewhere at an East Gallery window 3 years before all of this, that the difference between the performed version of a room and the real version was not a matter of comfort or convenience. It was a matter of honesty. Adeline had never been able to live in the performed version. It had always been inconvenient. It had never once been a flaw. The Empire buried Callum Reyes. Adeline Ashworth crossed the border. And what she found there, what was waiting on the other side of 2 days of unmaintained road and a north-facing window and a door opening to an unguarded face, was not a rescue. It was a life. The real version. The one worth crossing for. If this story moved something in you today, share it with one person who needs to hear it right now. Subscribe to Duke's Secret if you have not already. Drop a comment and tell me which moment stayed with you the longest. Was it the carriage driver asking if she was certain? The East Gallery window where it all began? The door opening in his face with all its defenses down? Or the morning light through the north window and the word yes? I read every single one. See you in the next story. Because there is always another one worth telling.